unexpected trade, bro. The Atlanta Falcons agreed to trade with the Philadelphia Eagles for safety Sidney Brown, according to the latest NFL news from ESPN insider Adam Schefter. Goes on to say the Falcons, Eagles trade. ESPN, Falcons and Eagles swap 4th and 6th round picks. So now the Falcons is definitely in a rebuilding.
Kevin Stefanski just pulled off something nobody saw coming. 16 signings in 5 days. And we're not talking about bottom barrel talent here. We're talking about calculated moves that have the entire NFC South paying attention. Sidney Brown from the Eagles. Austin Hooper coming back home. Azeez Ojulari from Georgia. The Falcons went from having almost no draft capital to suddenly looking like a team with a plan. But here's what makes this fascinating. They did it all while being completely strapped for cash.
Yeah, no, I think that my main takeaway was I don't think I was expecting this volume of signees in the first wave of free agency. I think kind of going into this free agency period, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the 2021 offseason where it felt like, okay, you don't have as much money to play with in free agency and you still have holes to fill, but you're looking at guys probably on like a shorter contract, a cap-friendly contract, which is basically what the Falcons did. But the volume of having 16 different players joining up in a matter of like 5 days holistically is like was not at all the direction that I thought things were gonna go.
That reaction right there tells you everything. Torrey wasn't expecting this volume of moves. Nobody was. Because when you look at Atlanta's cap situation heading into March 2025, this should have been a quiet offseason. They were projected to have roughly $18 million in cap space. That's nothing in today's NFL. For context, teams like the Patriots and Chargers were sitting on over $60 million each. The Falcons should have been window shopping, not filling a cart. But Stefanski looked at that limited budget and said, watch this. Instead of chasing the big ticket free agents that everyone else was throwing money at, he went hunting for value. Guys coming off injuries who had something to prove. Veterans on 1-year prove-it deals. Players with upside who other teams overlooked because they were busy bidding on the marquee names.
And I should say we are recording this on Wednesday, so there is a chance that between now and the time it reaches your earballs that, you know, there are a couple more moves have been made. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, you mentioned 2021. I was thinking back to like 2015, Dan Quinn's first year. And I think there are a few things, right? When you have a new coaching staff, a new regime coming in, oftentimes you want to go get guys that you're familiar with, right? I think that helps you build the culture in the locker room. They understand, they're familiar with just what to expect with kind of the new leadership. But it's also interesting to me that the similarities between this year and 2021 specifically are the relatively limited cap space that you're working with. And did you ever go to Chuck E. Cheese as
I
a
did.
kid? Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to, though, very often because
You weren't allowed to?
Yeah.
Now pay attention to what she just said about 2021 because that comparison is crucial. That was Terry Fontenot's first year as GM and he faced almost the identical situation. Limited cap space, new regime coming in, holes everywhere on the roster. And what did he do? He went bargain hunting. Signed guys like Fabian Moreau, Duron Harmon, Cordarrelle Patterson on team-friendly deals. Some of those moves worked out brilliantly. Patterson became an offensive weapon nobody anticipated. But here's the difference between 2021 and now. Back then, it felt reactive, like they were just trying to plug holes and survive the season. This time, there's a clear strategy. Stefanski isn't just collecting warm bodies. He's targeting specific types of players, guys with elite athleticism who got derailed by injuries, veterans who know his system from previous stops, and high character players who can help build the culture he wants.
I would get sick afterwards.
Okay.
So it was
the ball pit got you?
Yeah, like just the germs, like the kid germs. And so every time, and so it became, once I got a little bit like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years old, my mom and dad were like, you literally get sick every time you go. We're not going. I'm sorry.
Gotta build up that immune system.
I mean,
get some vitamin C.
Yeah, that's honestly maybe COVID started at Chuck E. Cheese. Like that was the epicenter
honestly,
of
maybe
COVID.
that's what there's 2 C's Chuck E. Cheese, right? Like COVID. I don't know.
I don't know. Conspiracy theory.
But the reason I bring that up is like what this has kind of reminded me, and again, a lot of the times where it seems like they have limited cap space, I feel like they almost make the most moves, right? And so it's almost like when you don't have enough tickets to compile to like go for that top shelf item, the gigantic stuffed bear or whatever, you're like, all right, give me the Chinese finger trap, give me the little plastic top.
That Chuck E. Cheese analogy is actually perfect. When you don't have enough tickets for the giant teddy bear, you maximize value with volume. And that's exactly what's happening here. While teams like Jacksonville were dropping $25 million per year on edge rushers, Atlanta was quietly assembling a roster full of players on 1- and 2-year deals worth $3 to $5 million annually. Take Sidney Brown as the perfect example. The Eagles moved him in a pick swap. Atlanta sent a 4th and 6th round pick in 2026 to move up in both rounds, and got Brown in the deal. On paper, that looks like Philadelphia just wanted to consolidate picks. But look deeper. Brown had 99 cover snaps last season and took 1 interception back 99 yards for a touchdown. He's got legitimate playmaking ability. The issue, he tore his ACL in January 2024 and missed most of the season rehabbing. So Philadelphia moves on, figuring they can't wait for him to return to form. Atlanta swoops in and gets a 24-year-old safety with elite speed and ball skills for essentially nothing. If he's healthy, that's a starting caliber player on a rookie contract. If he's not, they're out a couple of late round picks. That's the Chuck E. Cheese strategy in action. Calculated risk, massive upside.
See, right? And that's kind of what this feels like, is that they are really targeting some guys who maybe other teams at this point in time they have their eyes on who's the biggest name, big ticket players. And so that maybe limits overall the scope of what they can do, because they're compiling their resources to go after the top guy at each thing. And the Falcons are saying, all right, we know what this guy can do. We think he really fits this team. He adds good depth. And that's really been, I think, the theme of this free agency.
Yeah, I also think, too, and this is something Ian Cunningham even said in his presser last Friday, was he made mention of guys who had been on the up and up. Like they had really fast starts, hot starts, but then injuries kind of derailed them, and they're kind of coming off of those injuries. I think of someone like Samson Ebukam. I think of like Azeez Ojulari.
Yep.
Throw in Tua in there as well. Like I think some guys who are trying to come off of injuries in the last 2 to 3 years had great production right when they first entered the league, and now they're working their way.
Ian Cunningham said something revealing in that Friday press conference that most people glossed over. He specifically mentioned targeting guys who had fast starts, hot starts, but then got derailed by injuries. That's not generic GM speak, that's a specific player profile. Look at the names. Samson Ebukam, who had 10.5 sacks in his second season with San Francisco before injuries limited him. Azeez Ojulari, who was dominant at Georgia before an Achilles injury dropped him in the draft. Even Austin Hooper, who made 3 straight Pro Bowls from 2018 to 2020 before a neck injury and inconsistent quarterback play tanked his production. These aren't washed up veterans collecting paychecks. These are players in their mid to late 20s who've already proven they can play at a high level in the NFL. They just need the right situation and clean bills of health. And here's the genius part. They're all coming to Atlanta on 1-year deals. Prove-it contracts. Think about the incentive structure that creates. These guys aren't getting long-term security. They're betting on themselves. If Ebukam stays healthy and gets 8 sacks in 2025, he's looking at a 3-year, $30 million deal next March. If Ojulari returns to his Georgia form and becomes a consistent edge threat, some team is going to back up the Brinks truck. Atlanta becomes a showcase for players trying to rebuild their market value.
They can get back on track in their careers as veterans in this league, and I think that's kind of a through line I think you see too with some of these guys, like coming here to Atlanta on those like 1-year prove-it deals to set themselves up for a better future in the league. And I think that was something that even Ian Cunningham talking about, that was I honestly think that was in the back of his mind too, from the way that he was talking on Friday, that those were the type of guys that have something to play for and they wanted them here.
Yeah, and I think it speaks highly of Atlanta as well that these guys chose Atlanta to come and say, all right, if I'm going to prove it somewhere, I like Atlanta to give me a good opportunity to do just that. But you mentioned, we heard from Ian Cunningham. I can't really remember the GM kind of talking early in free agency or as free agency's been ongoing.
And that brings us to the elephant in the room, the quarterback situation. Because you can sign all the defensive playmakers and offensive weapons you want, but none of it matters if you don't have someone who can run the offense. Ian Cunningham addressed this directly in that press conference, and his answer was telling. He didn't commit to Tua Tagovailoa long-term. He didn't rule out drafting a quarterback. He basically said, we're evaluating everything, which in GM speak means they're keeping their options open but don't want to show their hand before the draft. Here's what we know for certain. Tua is on the roster right now on that one-year deal they gave him. He's got something to prove after missing time with concussions in 2024. If he stays healthy and plays well, great. Maybe they extend him. If he doesn't, Atlanta has an out after this season and can pivot to a rookie or another veteran. But look at the infrastructure they're building around that position. They brought back Austin Hooper, who caught passes from Matt Ryan during his peak years. They signed Alameda Zaccheaus, another former Falcons receiver who knows the organization. They're creating familiarity and continuity for whoever's under center.
Yeah.
To see that he was willing to kind of open up and answer some questions from the media, was there anything that he said during that kind of press conference that really stood out to you?
I mean, it has to be the whole Tua conversation. It has to be the quarterback conversation. I think
which
that's
you wrote about,
right? Which I wrote about on AtlantaFalcons.com. Go check it out. But I do think that.
So that is the latest on the Atlanta Falcons free agency debate.
Here's what makes this entire approach so fascinating from a roster building perspective. The Falcons are essentially running a one-year experiment with minimal long-term risk. They've added depth and competition at almost every position without mortgaging their future. No massive contracts, no dead money hanging over them in 2026. Just a bunch of hungry players trying to prove they belong in this league. Compare that to how other teams operate. You've got franchises handing out 4- and 5-year deals to players based on one good season, then spending the next 3 years trying to figure out how to get out from under those contracts. Atlanta's doing the opposite. They're saying, show us what you've got for 1 year and we'll talk long term if it works out. And there's another layer to this that people aren't discussing enough: the draft capital. By making these pick swaps and smaller trades, Stefanski has actually improved Atlanta's draft position in 2026 without giving up significant assets. They moved up in the 4th and 6th rounds to get Sidney Brown. Those are the rounds where you find starting caliber players if you scout well. The 2026 draft class is projected to be loaded with defensive talent, particularly in the secondary and at edge rusher. If even half of these one-year signings don't work out, Atlanta will be in prime position to reload through the draft with better picks than they had before. If most of them do work out, they've suddenly got a competitive roster and can be selective about who they re-sign. It's a win-win structure. Low risk, high reward, maximum flexibility. The kind of roster management that looks obvious in hindsight but requires serious discipline to execute when everyone else is throwing money around. Now, does this mean the Falcons are Super Bowl contenders in 2025? Absolutely not. This is year one of a rebuild, but what it does mean is they're rebuilding the smart way. They're not tanking, they're not punting on the season, they're creating competition, establishing a culture, and giving themselves options. Watch what happens when training camp starts in July. You're going to see position battles everywhere. Starting jobs up for grabs, guys who haven't had to compete in years suddenly fighting for roster spots. That's how you build an organization, not by handing out participation trophies and guaranteed contracts, but by making everyone earn it. And here's the final piece that ties it all together: the coaching staff. These aren't Stefanski's first rodeo. He's bringing in players he's familiar with from previous stops, guys who know his system and can help install it quickly. That matters more than people realize. When you're implementing a new scheme on both sides of the ball, having veterans who already understand the terminology and concepts accelerates the entire process. So when you step back and look at what Atlanta just pulled off in 5 days, it's actually pretty impressive. They went from having limited resources and low expectations to suddenly being one of the more interesting teams to watch in 2025. Not because they're going to win the division, let's be realistic. The NFC South is wide open, but Tampa and New Orleans both have more established rosters. But because they've created intrigue, will Sidney Brown return to form and become a ball hawk in that secondary? Can Azeez Ojulari stay healthy and provide the edge rush they desperately need? Does Austin Hooper have anything left in the tank, or is this just a nostalgia signing? Will Tua prove he can stay on the field and run this offense effectively? Those are legitimate questions with real implications for the franchise's future, and Kevin Stefanski has positioned himself to get answers to all of them in one season without committing long-term to any of them. them. That's smart management, the Chuck E. Cheese strategy. Maximize value when you can't afford the big prize. And if enough of these small wins add up, suddenly you've got enough tickets for that giant teddy bear after all. We'll find out in September if Stefanski's gamble pays off. But right now, in March 2025, the Falcons just became a lot more interesting than anyone expected them to be.